You're listening to Canada Now with Jeff Samet on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Agapi Gessesse is the executive director of the Career Education Empowerment Center for Young Black Professionals in Toronto and joins us on Canada Now. Agapi, good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, a little more about CEE off the top. For those that didn't hear the first time around when we had you on before, your charity is dedicated to addressing economic and social barriers impacting Black youth in Canada by offering programs to improve their careers and education and empowerment that are holistic, person-centered, and culturally relevant. And boy, you guys are, for a variety of reasons, would be more vital than ever.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I often say to folks, I think our work has always been very vital. I think we've been doing this work for a really long time. We've been an organization since 2012. And so the work that, I think the rest of the world is catching up to the realization of how important this work is. We realized that, a while ago and have been doing this really important work to see our young people be able, and part of our mission is to create an economy and a society where our young people are economically empowered, but also they could live good quality lives.
Well, you've recently written a piece on Toronto.com, Agapi, about how the pandemic has amplified the existing inequalities for Toronto's Black youth.
Right. Yeah, it seems as though, a couple of months ago, our community was already in a sense of panic since the pandemic hit, because as most people know, it has hit low-income communities a lot harder. Unemployment rates, at sea, we find young people work, and out of 266 of our young people, 142 of them were found out of jobs. And so that takes a hit not just to them as individuals, but their families and their households. And so food insecurities in our communities was a huge thing, mental health. And I think, that coupled with what's happening in the world now, it's just really adding to the compounding issues that we were seeing at the beginning of this pandemic, let alone, the state of our community's mental health and the vicarious trauma we're experiencing in this current state of affairs.
Yeah, and part of what you mentioned there was the urgent need of food, and you talk about the 266 members, and at the start of the pandemic, we talk about it being a problem already. 97% of your 266 members were in urgent need of food, and that's when we talked about that back in April.
Yeah, back in April. And so I think that, the pandemic had brought to light a lot of insecurities in our communities and areas that we can address. I mean, as an organization, we've been trying our best to drop off food boxes, and we've been working with Food Share Canada and other Black-led, Black-serving organizations to address those needs and get hot meals out and get, hygienic products and baby supplies to meet the needs. And so I think that the pandemic had revealed to us a lot of the insecurities that our communities were facing.
Something to keep in mind as well that you address in the piece, and there are so many points that you hit on that many people might not have thought of. Many Black youth are working frontline jobs during this pandemic, which obviously puts them at higher health risk. So even if they are working, they might be in a bit of trouble right now.
Completely. Low-income households are usually folks who are working frontline jobs. They're the ones who are making sure that the rest of Canada has what they need. They're the ones who are making deliveries and working at Amazon. And those are the folks who are in your grocery stores bagging and making sure that the carts are cleaned down and all of those types of things. And so, and delivering food, all of these kind of courier services by bike and by car, those are all frontline jobs. And I think we often think when we think frontline, we often think nurses and doctors, but there's a lot of folks who are receiving that are helping during this pandemic that are actually exposing themselves and their families on a daily basis to make sure that the rest of Canada has exactly what they need.
So what are barriers like for forgotten Black youth in accessing support during this pandemic? And I'm sure this is really where CEE comes in a big way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of areas of gaps. I think that, at the end of all of this, even when we start thinking forward towards recovery, a lot of Canadians are not going to have jobs. And the unemployment rate for Black youth, 12 times what it is the rest of the country. And so how is that going to be addressed in a world where everyone is unemployed? So that then, again, will leave Black youth at the back of that line. And so finding employment, finding ways for them to receive subsidies or basic needs being met as they look for employment is also very vital.
As you've written in the piece, Agapi, Canadian hospitals do not collect race-based data as thoroughly as they do in the U.S. So how have you been able to notice how hard the pandemic has hit African Canadians in that respect?
Well, they've been able to trace by region and by neighborhoods. And so you can tell that people who are affected more severely in low-income neighborhoods. And unfortunately in this country, race and class go hand in hand. And so based off of the neighborhood improvement areas that are hardest hit, it's very clear that Black and brown communities are the ones that are being hardest hit. And unfortunately, Canadians, or the Canadian government, I should say, seems to be very reluctant to collect race-based data. My only kind of assumption there is maybe we're not going to like what we see because that will then result in us having to deal with the harsh reality that, we're not as better off morally than that of our southern neighbors.
Is part of your research part of what you do that, are you able to get to government in the hopes that they could do a better job of collecting race-based data?
Well, I think that the City of Toronto, once again, and I think we can, is usually the first to react to things like this, and they have an anti-Black racism department at the City of Toronto that has been really pushing hard. And so the City of Toronto has committed to collecting race-based data. The province, that conversation is definitely being had at that level. And I also know that folks are trying to push for that at a federal level as well. So I think that us now knowing that, I think getting behind those organizations that are doing that work and pushing forward, I think the Alliance for Healthy Communities is definitely pushing for race-based data to be a thing Ontario-wide. And so I think getting behind those organizations to push and give some pressure would be helpful.
Well, to learn more about CEE's virtual program and more, check out ceetoronto.com. CEE Center for Young Black Professionals, Executive Director Agapi Gessesse. Agapi, appreciate you joining us and coming back to the show. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
All right. You too. We'll check out how anti-Black racism protests were in Toronto over the weekend ahead on Canada Now. I'm Jeff Samet. It's Sirius XM, Canada Talks, Channel 167.